Welcome to the Inspiring Leadership Podcast, where we seek to elevate your leadership and transform your workplace. My name is Dominic Seal. I'm delighted to be the host of this show. With my team at eqstrategist, we seek to bring you a dose of healthy inspiration and practical insights into how to enhance team performance, cultivate resilience, foster collaboration, and shape culture. Michelle, thank you so much for taking time for us to have this call today. Really appreciate you. I think it's been several years since we first met, and really enjoyed that collaboration on this creating a culture of psychological safety for one of our clients. And ever since then, just been in awe at the progress you've made. TED Talk speaker now, featured on CNA, an amazing wellness facilitator and counselor. You've always been someone that I really look forward to as one of those authentic human beings, and share quite a number of parallels in our career journey as well. But Michelle, before we jump too far ahead of myself, just like if you don't mind to share with our wonderful audience here a little bit about your backstory, Michelle.
Hi everyone. Yeah, thank you, Dom, for having me on this podcast. So, my story starts off like many Singaporeans. So I've kind of led the very local life. Get a good job, get a good degree, and your life will be secured. But as I graduated from school, I realized that that was not the case. What happened was that when I actually came into, interesting that you mentioned about training together, because I actually got into training at the young age of 18. And I really loved being with people and that whole human people development space, but I shut that voice down, and I paid attention to my version of success, which was, get a good job, get a good degree, and eventually I graduated from a local university with a degree in marketing and communications, and I went to that space. And in that space, I unfortunately had a successful degree, a successful career, but at the same time, I suffered from burnout, panic attacks, which eventually led to an eating disorder and bulimia and body dysmorphic disorder. So at that time, I didn't have much choice because I was potentially going to lose my life. So I left my corporate job at 27 when everyone else was kind of climbing the corporate ladder and chasing the career and running the rat race, and I just put a pause on everything. And thinking back, it was a really difficult time because nobody seemed to understand why I did that. But I had two choices, which was to continue to live the way I did and to push through the hardship and ignore my mental health challenges, or quit and make an attempt to heal my life. So I did that, and I never looked back. So one thing led to another, and you probably know about my story as well. And I pivoted into well-being, which was really the biggest silver lining of my life.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. That's such an inspiring story, Michelle. It's not about what happens, it's what we do with what happens that really matters.
Yeah.
One of our favorite quotes is not the blowing of the wind, it's the setting of the sail that defines our success and our destiny, by the amazing Jim Rohn.
Yeah.
And
back then I didn't know that the only way out is through.
Yeah.
You couldn't see it. You couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel.
And yet it's become the defining moment of your life.
Indeed. And
Absolutely.
It's been, quite a number of years now. And I look back and I'm so grateful for that journey and to be able to empower others through that journey as well.
Wow. I think one of the things they say is that it's okay to make mistakes as long as you learn from it. Right?
Yeah.
And you are a real model of not
Thank
just
you.
learning from it and helping others benefit from it.
It's really hard.
Yeah, it's so difficult. It's so difficult. Yeah. You and I share so many parallels in our journey. Ex-corporate life as well. Climb the corporate ladder, very similar Asian upbringing in many ways. Right, get that degree, climb the corporate ladder, and life will be sweet. Tell us a little bit more. Your first degree, your first part of your career. I understand that was in marketing and communications.
Yeah, so in university, I didn't exactly love what I was studying, but I thought, I really invested 4 years of my life. I needed to do something, and I was very conditioned with, the right version of success, living the very local version of what success meant and the metrics of success. And when I graduated, I went into writing for a living, and I wrote for quite a number of years. And then over the years in my 20s, I dabbled in marketing, events, project management. Didn't exactly like what I was doing, but just thought that it was normal, and so I pushed through everything, and eventually led to panic attacks. And I didn't even knew it was a panic attack because mental health was not a thing that was discussed at that time.
Right.
And I went to the GP, and he was like, "Oh, yeah, maybe you're just a little bit stressed. You just need to do some breathing techniques." The panic attacks came and left, and then came and left for a couple of years. Eventually, the overwhelm got too much, and I felt so burnt out. I was unmotivated. The only thing that I looked forward to was like clearing my leave days and traveling. And I traveled so much in my 20s because I was looking for the escape from work. And from work doesn't bring me joy. And I recently chanced upon a quote which says that, burnout happens not because of the things that happen to you, but you're not doing enough of what brings you joy and meaning.
I love that.
And I really resonated with that, because living an aligned, purposeful life is not something that was talked about. And it was a dark period, because you see your peers running ahead. They're, in local slang, they're chonging for their careers, whereas you just took the intentional pause. And it was one of the hardest decisions I ever had to make in my life. Yeah.
Were you married at that time?
No, I wasn't.
You weren't. You were single.
I was single. The world is your oyster, but yet I chose to pause. And everyone was like, "Why on earth did you do that?" Because here is someone that, she has this career ahead of her, and they didn't know that I was battling through my bulimia and body dysmorphia. It's like, why did you do that? And no one could understand or rationalize why I did that. And I remember cutting off contact with a lot of people because I didn't know how to explain to them, and there was no language around mental health at that time. Yeah.
And this is not that long ago, Michelle.
It was almost a decade
almost
ago.
An eternity, really a decade ago?
Almost a decade ago, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And you said that there was no language around that, even at that time. Tell me a little bit more. I've not actually heard very much, excuse my ignorance, about this body dysmorphia thing.
Yeah,
Tell us a bit more about
even
that.
till now, the languaging around mental health, I think we are only starting to see a pickup in this space. But at that time, even basic terms like depression, anxiety, they were not talked about at all. Like mindfulness, something that I'm very passionate in, self-compassion. They were not terms or coping mechanisms or tools that people used to help them to cope with the daily stresses of life. So there was no languaging around it. There was no talk. I was labeled a hippie one too many times. And
really?
Yeah, so for so many years.
A hippie? Why? Why hippie?
I was very much into yoga and meditation, and they were like, okay, it's going to be a phase, Michelle's going to be out of it in a while, and it didn't, and it just I just kept deepening the practice and my inner work in the space. It started really with yoga and meditation, and then it expanded into understanding more about human behavior, psychology, and what I can do to increase my inner resourcing toolkit.
Wow.
Yeah.
And did you get into that by accident, or was it a recommendation from a therapist, a counselor? How did you get into that?
So at the time, I guess I was reading a lot of books on mindfulness and meditation because there was no events in Singapore to attend. I was already attending therapy. So I sought a lot of answers in the books, in the podcasts that I was listening to, mainly from the Western world. And I'm like, why is this not talked about or shared in Singapore?
Right.
And, the youth having the vitality of life, and I had a stronger inclination to take risks at that time. I felt that, I would just start something from scratch and see where this goes, because, a couple of factors. The job market at the time wasn't the way it is today, and I never felt like I would be out of a job. If it didn't succeed, I could always go back to the corporate world.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's what you sensed back in the day.
Yeah. Yeah, that was what I sensed back in the day. My therapist was a huge help. And eventually she discharged me because she was like, you're kind of practicing the tools that I would offer to you as a therapist, and I'm just going to give you an open date. And she knew exactly when to release me, because if we had more sessions, thinking back, I might have unconsciously made her or our sessions a crutch to my own improvement. So she kind of like, okay, I'm just going to give you an open date. If you still need any support, you're always welcome to come back. But I think I'm just going to close your file.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think that was the start of, really the continuation of that journey, but the start of a new chapter.
What a wonderful therapist. I must give a shout out to that wonderful human being.
I've been trying to find her.
Really?
I think she relocated out of Singapore, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is such a blessing, And thank you so much for sharing this story. I know today mental health and well-being is so much more in the consciousness, I like to think.
Yeah.
And yet in the Asian context, there's still a little bit of taboo around it.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you're aware, but in 2001, when I went through that very difficult organizational restructure, I didn't even know what depression meant. But they were dark days in my career, and some people would have read in my book about my story, my journey with my brother, who about maybe 35 years ago, studying in Australia, was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and certainly back in the day, it was not something you discuss, you sweep under the rug. It's not my problem. I'm a software engineer. What can I do to fix it? And yet, today you just speaking up so openly about it, and I think it's just such a powerful message of hope for others around you. But thank you. I know it takes courage and vulnerability to do that as well.
It took me so many years to come out, and I wanted to also make sure that I healed from that before I came out to share publicly about my story as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. And when you say it took many years, firstly, when you went through those panic attacks, did you know what it was at that time? Or
I didn't. And when I went to the clinic, I didn't really get a sense of what it was either.
Was it a GP that you saw?
It was a GP.
It was a GP. And what did the GP say?
I didn't know if they had enough education around that. So he said that, it's just stress, and it will get better with some breathing techniques.
Right.
But he didn't offer me what type of breathing techniques, so I was kind of left to figure it out. I had no referral at that time. The therapist that I found was through my own. The therapist that I found was a referral from another GP. Yeah.
Right. Okay, and you finally sought out a therapist? Or?
She was my second therapist.
Right.
Yeah, so I was referred to a psychiatrist at the start, and then the psychiatrist assessed my condition. She's like, okay, I'm going to refer you to someone else that specializes in eating disorders, and she might be able to help you. So that was how I found my therapist at the time.
Right.
Yeah, which was, very grateful for that recommendation.
How did you feel, if you don't mind me asking, Michelle, when someone suggested it might help you to see a psychiatrist?
I was actually really open because I was desperate to heal. I was going nowhere with my own, mindfulness and meditation and my yoga practices, and I felt like I needed someone to be able, professional help and support to be able to get me through it.
Right.
Yeah, so it was kind of like a call for help when I went to the GP, and when I saw him, it wasn't for a call for a flu or a physical health condition. It was really like I need a recommendation and a referral.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely wonderful. Tell me, how did your parents deal with that at that time?
Honestly,
were they aware? Were they aware of what you were going
they were
through?
not until
Really?
today. Like,
Really?
I don't know how to tell them. Yeah,
Oh, no way. Oh,
I
my
really
goodness.
debated, like, should I share it with them, and I decided not to. Not because we are not close, but because I don't know. I feel like the Asian image is just like, I don't want to burden them or cause them any worry. So until today, they still don't know about this story.
Really? Oh, no.
Yeah,
Oh,
but
wow.
in-laws know
Okay.
as well.
Wow.
Yeah, they do know, but my own parents don't really know.
So who else?
But they might after watching like a couple of podcasts or stuff online.
Oh my goodness. And who was journeying with you at that time? Were you all alone in this, or you had friends who were close to you who you had confided in?
So I felt a lot of shame and guilt.
Really?
At that time, we didn't know it was shame, but it was just really that lack of human interaction. So because I had such a challenging relationship with food, like eating with someone becomes really challenging. Because I'll end up in the bathroom puking or vomiting after every meal. And you just don't know how to have social gatherings. So I rejected quite a number of gatherings, even lunch appointments with my colleagues. And I still recall very vividly, just eating a snack in the middle of the day. I would run to the toilet and the bathroom in the midst of work and return feeling extremely weak after a vomiting episode, after a purging episode. Yeah, and you still need to show up for work, and you still need to show up for that meeting, and you still need to pretend that it's okay until it got a little bit too much, and I'm like, okay, I can't do this.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. And was your company at that time when you were working with them, you were going through some of these symptoms, challenges? I suspect it would have affected your level of productivity, perhaps performance
For sure,
at work. Was there any inkling, like support from the managers?
Yeah, so not only was that mentally challenging, it was physically very challenging because I was quite weak. I was quite small in my mid to low 40s at that time.
Okay.
So I was physically very weak. There wasn't support because I didn't open up to anyone.
Right.
So if you look into eating disorders, they tend to be some symptoms tend to be very hidden. So it's very hard to tell if someone has an eating disorder. You could walk past someone on the street and never know that they have an eating disorder, and they may just appear like they have a healthy weight range.
Right.
Yeah, so at the time I didn't have that support, and to make things worse, I was working for a brand agency that dealt with food packaging. So every single day as the marketing and communications person, I was bombarded with images of like Coca-Cola, Lay's, Pocky, food in
Right.
general. Food packaging was the bulk of the business. So not only was I dealing through this in secret, but I was in an environment that was extremely activating for me. Yeah, so I knew I needed to leave.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. That would have been such a difficult period for you. Not knowing what you were going through and not having a lot of support and help and empathy.
Yeah, and to add on, I didn't feel psychologically safe enough to confide in anyone at work.
Really?
And I was afraid of judgment. At the time, there was nothing called employee assistance programs, which many major companies have these days.
Okay.
So I didn't know who to turn to, and even my close colleagues at work, I wasn't sure if my secret would be safe with them or I'll be penalized or judged on the quality of my work after that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, roll the tape forward all those years later today. Do you feel that the level of awareness is significantly higher in society in general and in the workplaces?
I think definitely, and especially since October 2023, where mental health was announced in Parliament that it was going to be on a national agenda. On the national agenda, the conversations and the landscape have shifted really significantly. Yeah, you start to see people open up more, not just about the mental health challenges, but also on the challenges at home, caregiving, or maybe they feel a lot more open to be able to share about their workload and really ask for help. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that conversation is such an important conversation these days.
Yeah.
I mean, 2001, when I went through that restructure and being on the receiving end, it was actually the first time I was not just on the receiving end, but any experience I've had on a restructure. So it was all new to me, and yet today there's hardly any human being that I've met, certainly in our journey as coaches and consultants in organizations internationally, that hasn't had that tap on the shoulder.
Yeah.
Just last night, Sue and I, when we arrived in this beautiful country, we got on the Grab and we spoke to this amazing human being who was so fluent and eloquent. He had studied at Deakin University.
Yeah.
And it didn't come across as a huge surprise to me that he was formerly an executive in the banking and finance industry.
Yeah.
Single child, looking after elderly parents now, and doing the Grab thing, and didn't delve into the circumstances.
Yeah.
But you know what? I think Singapore is probably one of those places where we probably have the most educated
Yeah.
Grab drivers in the world that I've seen.
Yeah.
And yet, people being tapped in the shoulders in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and not being able to reinvent themselves often is a challenge. And yet, you are a picture of transformation, and through that journey, not just reinvented yourself. You seem like you found your happy space.
I have.
You have. Tell us more about the happy space, Michelle.
Well, the happy space is really about inspiring and working with people. And as a child, I've always been pretty comfortable with, you would say, the ugliness of humanity, like people's emotions, the difficult stuff, the struggles. And I thought I was weird, like I was an outlier. And now I get to help people with that. And that is really my happy place, be it working with individuals or teams or even on a larger scale, organizations. Yeah.
Wow. And were you always like that when you look back at your life, I suppose, that happy space? I know you mentioned that you always loved teaching and in the early days and all that, but were you just naturally drawn to just bringing this joy and happiness to people?
In my 20s, I think I was confused. So I kind of let that fire, like it was always there, but it dimmed. And I let the voices of the world kind of take over, like, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that in order to be successful. And so a lot of those beliefs, systemic beliefs, I felt I had to unlearn.
Right.
And it was really hard.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Is that unlearning?
Yeah. And I worked with, a coach, therapist along the way, because kind of unravel a lot of that. Yeah.
Michelle, during those 2 years, I suppose in the several years of your hiatus outside the corporate world, don't mind me asking, what were you doing for income-wise?
So after I left my last corporate role, before I started my company, I actually went for a 10-day silent Vipassana meditation retreat.
Wow.
In Nepal.
In Nepal?
In Nepal.
Okay.
And it was there and then that I had this really strong, download from the universe, you call it, or a thought that popped into my mind that I needed to come back and do this. Okay. So I came back. I just really literally like that, I incorporated a company. I started to run like public workshops. I started with youths and teens and younger kids and parents, working with parents. And then I was teaching yoga on the side as well. And then eventually COVID hit. So that was doing quite well until COVID hit. And I could either close or pivot the business, or I could go back to a corporate role while attempting to bring this back up. I didn't really have the bandwidth to pivot because at the time I was expecting my first.
Oh my.
Like really
got married?
I got married, yes.
Oh my goodness.
Pre-COVID.
Wow.
Then I had a first kid in 2020.
Did you find this amazing man in Nepal?
So he was the only one that knew about my eating disorder because day in, day out, we had to meet for meals and all. Okay. So the purging, he saw me through the purging episodes and all. And he was the one that pushed me towards help.
Wow.
Yeah, like you need to find a professional that can support you because I don't know how to support you even anymore. And I was like, yeah, you kind of make sense. And so I went.
We always need one of those in our lives, huh?
Yeah,
the ones that will hold us to account and push us a little bit harder out of love.
Yeah, and I think, even with one person knowing about my journey, it was extremely isolating. So I cannot imagine the youths or the adults these days that feel like they have nobody to turn to, because that in itself feels like, and they can just implode into themselves, and mental health challenges are not going anywhere. And I'm huge on beyond mental emotional well-being, that piece of social well-being. You need to speak with like-minded people. You need to have a circle of people that you trust. You need to catch up for meals like what we always do. And those are your protective factors.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I'd like to double click a little bit, if you don't mind, on
Yes.
that. Man, you were speaking about how the voices of the world start to
Yeah.
overtake your inner voices. And it seems like you found your, I don't know, your life's calling or your vocation or whatever in silence. 10 days. Oh my goodness.
Silence,
I can't do
yeah.
it for 10 seconds.
I did a couple of retreats
Okay.
pre-COVID.
Okay.
Yeah, and I still miss them because right now with two young children at home, it isn't that easy to
Wow.
take unofficial domestic leave to go for those retreats anymore. But they are pretty transformative for me.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, Michelle, I have a couple of people in my life. I'm sure there's more than two,
Yeah.
at least a dozen. You know, in our life's journey, we can't help but come across people who are at the crossroads of their lives, who have done everything they could in corporate and got all
Yeah.
that joy, and yet they feel like something else is missing. You know,
Yeah.
and they're kind of revisiting where they are, and there's an inclination. I think sometimes they observe what we do at eqstrategist, and they're drawn by the seeming joy and purpose and meaning we
Yeah.
find from our vocation. But there's this obvious attachment to something that's familiar.
Yeah.
You know, a corporate job, and that is
Yeah.
also possibly quite well paying. And let's face it, we have the realities of mortgages and
Yeah.
children's schooling and education, and the pressure doesn't get easier.
Yeah.
You know, for someone who's contemplating, you know, the heart tells them one thing and yet the head is the struggle.
Yeah.
What advice might you give them?
Wow, that's a great question, and I know I have so many things that I could share. Just let me zoom in out to what. Well, if I guess it also depends on which part of their journey that they're at. I think. Well, I often get these questions from like people who are in their 20s or 30s that are looking for transitions.
Okay.
And their head is saying one thing, and their hearts are saying one thing. I would really, encourage people to go out there and talk to other people.
Okay.
I find that Singaporeans, I don't know, we are so deep down in doing the work or we are so absorbed in our 9 to 6 often that we don't go out there beyond our bubble to look at different perspectives. So they may not know what they want at that point in time, but maybe there is a slight spark. Maybe there is a question. And to follow that curiosity and speak to different people helps them to gather different perspectives on what they can do.
Right.
Yeah. And the other thing that I often share with my clients is also to zoom in on their values. Like what are your current values? And are you taking actions to move towards a values-based life?
Right.
Because if you're kind of stuck in this job and maybe you feel like you have like golden handcuffs and you're not able to get out of it, we still need to pay the bills. But ultimately, it may not be that sustainable for you if if you're not living in accordance to your values. And
Right.
if there is an opportunity, could you take some micro steps or small steps to be able to move you towards that line,
Right.
towards your values rather than away from it?
Right. So
Yeah.
taking small steps,
Yeah.
having a view, having a
Yeah.
connecting even more deeply with your values and listening to that, and then taking small steps is
And also that the power of introspection.
okay.
We live in a world of distraction and entertainment, and everything is just go go go. But the utilization of reflection, introspection is not enough. Like how many of us actually put down our phones to connect to another human being or ourselves?
Yeah.
And I find that maybe the answers are already there, but because we are so influenced by the external voices that we are not able to tune inwards enough to seek out those voices that are already there from the beginning.
Wow. Any advice from a pragmatic standpoint, dealing with the realities of this world, from a
Yeah.
financial management and all that kind of stuff? I suppose in your situation, you felt like you had no choice because your
Yeah.
well-being and I think you were at quite
Yeah.
a difficult
Yeah.
phase in your life where Sometimes we always hear about the saying that you have to hit rock bottom
Yeah.
before you, and it sounded like
Yeah.
you were.
Yeah, it was exactly
It was
that.
like that. So you had no choice, right?
Yeah,
And then
no
you find
choice.
that,
Yeah, I mean, if I went even lower, I think I might have lost my life. It was how bad it was with that food deprivation.
And that's just what I read about your journey,
Yeah.
which is why I bring that up as well. So you hit rock bottom and you felt I have no choice.
Yeah.
Worry about money or not, I have to make this happen. I'll
Yeah.
find a way. And somehow you find a way,
Yeah.
right, at that moment. And of course, many people are not probably at that level,
Yeah.
right, of rock bottom.
Yeah.
For me, certainly I wasn't at rock bottom.
Yeah.
I was doing it tough, and yet I just thought, in my generation, I'm probably 1-2 ahead of you. My dad's generation, it was just like, tough it out, mate. Tough
Yeah.
it out. Right?
Yeah.
And I was doing that. I was glad I was doing that because, you kind of, I think there is some value in learning about resilience by sometimes toughing it out before giving up too quickly. But it was really being inspired by this wonderful self-help journey that I went through, about my encounter with the amazing Tony Robbins.
Yeah.
And just being fully inspired and going through that journey of understanding my mission statement, what my core values were, and the power of living in authenticity with it.
Yeah.
And yet, of course, the pragmatic reality is when eqstrategist was founded 20 years ago, I have to give credit to the amazing Sue, my wife, right? Because the two of us had to make a decision. We had 3 young ones, a very decent salary. And I think Buddha talks about one of the biggest causes of human suffering is that attachment.
Yes,
right?
indeed.
The attachment to the things. And certainly there was that attachment, and being able to detach from it was probably, and trusting that voice was probably one of the hardest things we had to do. And yet probably the best thing that has happened in our life. So I can relate very much to. But I just love your thoughts about that detachment process.
Detachment,
that
wow.
might be able to help others.
It's one of the hardest things to do. It's one of the attitudinal foundations of mindfulness. There are 9. I mean, without going to all 9, I think non-attachment is a really difficult one to practice because for me, I often feel like I am going against the norm because, material success, material wants, sell a huge paycheck, like all of that. I had to really unlearn what it means to just put some distance between me and that. And even today, like as an entrepreneur, it's hard. You look at your bank account from month to month, and it's not a fixed fat paycheck that you often get in a corporate job. And just living with that uncertainty is the practice itself, is that practice of non-attachment.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And that takes learning, right? I think the biggest message of hope through your example there is that these things, this thing about detachment, this thing about having faith that if you live in line with your core values, it will work out. Even that takes practice.
Yeah, that takes practice. And along the way, there will be a lot of self-doubt.
Yeah.
And it's, I think everyone will face that.
Good on you.
And it's not about, you may feel like you're not good enough or this may not work out, but when I get really confused or when I get stuck, I come back to the drawing board. Like, am I living with my values? What is the world that I have visioned for my children as well? What kind of world do I want to create? And in the corners to that, then I take one small step forward. If it feels really intimidating to take that huge step, just take one small step. So you're not standing in the ocean itself, but maybe you're just inching between shore and the start of where the water bank is.
That's beautiful. Fantastic. Michelle, tell us, I'd love to hear about that vision of that future you love to create for your children, for yourself.
Well, in a nutshell, just a happier and a more meaningful. Well, the world is chaotic these days, so my thoughts are a little bit chaotic too with like these 2 weeks. So I guess eventually as parents, I think very much about the day that I'll leave the earth, very much, and how do I want to parent them? How do I want to groom them? And it's not about always holding their hands, but it's about, can I equip them with tools so that they're able to stand on their own 2 feet? And for youths, I do find that is sorely lacking in today's world and in Singapore. I speak for Singapore. In the places that I've been teaching at and the youth that I interacted with. And that vision of the world is really to be able to create a world that prides itself or thrives not on just monetary success, but really on the things that are intangible and brings us joy, like human connection. Like, in Singapore, there's that kampong spirit.
Right.
It's small things like that can help us to move towards a happier world.
Absolutely. Wonderful. So inspired. I can't help but be drawn to my dad's 89th birthday party last week.
Nice.
And, my dad and mom, dad is living they're both living still a pretty full and fulfilling life at 89 and 86. And 60 people in the room, people who they exercise with regularly. They have a group called PAIDA. They do this tapping exercise. And quite apart from that, it's just the whole group coming out and celebrating birthdays together. And there was a gentleman who brought along a guitar and he was just singing
lovely.
joyfully. And it reminded me of, I think there's a research done about happiness, right? And I think one of the things, they studied this place in Okinawa, I think, in Japan.
The blue zone.
And they're speaking about happiness and connection and having little meaningful engagement. I think those are some of the key things in life that bring meaning and purpose. Right? And I think in the course of work life nowadays, everyone's can get so drawn into tasks and goals and KPIs and the pressure to hit those numbers that we sometimes forget that the biggest gifts is around us, the people that we journey with, the connections and all that kind of stuff.
And we pride ourselves on efficiency, efficacy, being quick. And I don't know, I'm a little bit skeptical. Like, I don't know where that's headed because already we're seeing a lot of cracks in the system. And even for trainings itself, that it's, people know that they come for half day or full day training, but yet they feel like they have no choice but to open up their laptops and attend to their emails because someone needs something urgently and that was due yesterday. And how do we then address that? I think it's beyond mental health. It goes, there are a lot of systemic challenges that we need to go through together.
I mean, it reminds me of, I think, Abraham Maslow, who was apparently one of the greatest behavioral psychologists that the world has known. I think back about a century ago when most psychologists were treating mental illness, he was like, shouldn't we be learning from people who are living fulfilling, thriving lives, right? And really the focus, instead of treating illness, was on cultivating fulfillment and happiness. And I thought his work was very groundbreaking, but that's also a mindset and a reframe, quite apart from popping pills and doing all that, which has a role to play and it's important. I think my brother was glad that he eventually, certainly with my dad's openness, took medication. And this back in the day, 30, 40 years ago, I still remember even my dad's first, when we hardly knew about mental ill health at that time, but when it was decided that Gregory had a chemical imbalance and really should be taking medication to just put him into a more stable frame of mind, generate a little bit more dopamine and stuff like that, which is the imbalance is not creating for him. In fact, back in the day, my dad's first reaction was, "You're not turning my son into a drug addict." Because that's all, what
and
it's like, drugs in Malaysia, right? You're not turning my son into a drug addict, someone who has to depend on it as a crutch for the rest of his life. And of course, drugs had a different connotation in Malaysia. And yet, so I'm not against it. I certainly see a lot of value in that. And I think the real treatment, if you like, is to find your way to generate the chemicals that are already inside of you. the dopamine, the serotonin, all the things that bring us happiness and joy.
Yeah, definitely agree with you. And I think we have, look at mental health or even resilience. So it's kind of on that mental health on that continuum. And we are focusing quite a fair bit on intervention. But my passion is really in a lot where my effort is in the prevention space. Like, how are we preventing? Like, how are we protecting? What are some of the protective factors that we can introduce to people before we need to intervene?
Yeah, prevention is a lot less stressful and definitely a lot more fulfilling than having to treat, right?
Yeah.
And so,
But prevention is not often given the limelight it needs to have, because it's seen as a good to have. Like, I'm already so busy, why do I need to learn about all these things?
Yes.
But they don't know when they will need it. And it acts as a buffer against the stresses when they really meet a situation where they feel like they are completely overwhelmed.
Michelle, tell us, I know in your work is very much based on evidence-based, right, interventions that help organizations as well create this culture of psychological safety where people can thrive. Tell us, what is the latest data about why organizations should invest in this?
Oh no, I didn't prepare that question.
It's okay. Just generally.
Well, latest data, okay. Psychological safety is a buzzword. We have been hearing a lot about psychological safety, and I think in Singapore itself, it's also, there are many buzzwords, and I think at the heart of psychological safety is really empathy in action, and that also translates into compassion. People don't want that tangible financial paycheck anymore. They want an emotional paycheck. So how do we include things, how do we create things like a positive work culture for them, flexibility? How do we empower a manager with emotional intelligence to be able to manage the team? I think all of that contributes to psychological safety. And research has proven that teams that have higher levels of psychological safety are able to innovate a lot more. They feel safer, levels of trust goes up, and people engage in risk-taking behaviors as well.
Right.
And we know that one of the initial studies is by Amy Edmondson, as well as there's also Project Aristotle by Google as well, and they've studied so many teams. But I'm really curious to know about a study that is more related to the Asian context.
Right.
Yeah, because of cultural nuancing and all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you. Maybe one step back, just love to get back into that thing about from an individual standpoint, if someone's going through a lot of undue stress and maybe even burnout without even knowing that they're going through it. What are the initial warning signals?
I think before they reach burnout. Okay. So, there are different people experience different sort of symptoms. So for some, it might be physical health symptoms. They might feel like they feel tired easily. They might not be able to sleep. They suffer from insomnia. It could be they physically also withdraw from social gatherings. So that withdrawal leads into isolation. They could also be irritable. They experience like short bursts of anger. They experience biological factors as well, and different systems in the body might stop functioning, like our daily biological symptoms, like am I able to go to the toilet like a human being? Am I for the women, does my the time of the month come regularly? So it can manifest in things like that when the systems are kind of struggling to be able to cope altogether, and that might be initial signs before they eventually lead into burnout, where they feel completely overwhelmed. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. And given that sometimes, we all know that humans are so resilient. We can put up with this stuff for a long time and just kind of sweep it under the rug.
Yeah.
I think you coaching that, empowering people to have that early warning signals is so important, empowering them to do so. What advice would you give to managers on how to identify and detect these warning signals? Because how often have we heard in organizations where, it's so busy, we're accelerating change, and then my top guys tender their resignation. And people don't tend to tender their resignation overnight.
Yeah.
It's built up over time.
Yeah.
And very often when
sure.
we attend the workshops, we see signs of burnout and, jadedness. And that hasn't
so
happened
common.
overnight, right? Is there any advice you would give to leaders on how to watch for those? And how should they deal with it when they see the signals?
Yeah. I think based on my, personal interactions, I feel that many managers want to help, but they have no avenue they don't know what to do.
Right.
So it could be a case of we need more psychoeducation.
Okay.
We need more training programs that are able to equip managers with the skills that are needed in order to spot things like peer support programs. So the manager, it is quite a big responsibility to put it that managers face these days to be able to look at the mental health challenges of people. But I think as well, we spend so much time at work, 9 to 6 or even beyond. Like peer support programs are super underrated, but they are highly effective in spotting those signs of distress.
Yes.
And I think more and more organizations are also receptive to cultivating peer support across the different teams and organizations. So I would say this too, more psychoeducation, peer support as well, and really to be equipped with things that you can offer as support, like a simple "How are you today?"
Yeah.
Do you want some time to be able to catch up? We don't have to do it in the office. We can catch up over coffee outside. Just basic care and concern. I think it goes a long way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think about 20 years ago, I observed in Australia, there was a huge drive for managers, employees in organizations to go and attend physical, like first aid courses.
Yeah.
Right? So that we can see signs of someone who's maybe early signs of stroke or whatever it is and be able to support and intervene appropriately. But I think certainly one of the best things I felt that I learned, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, I completed a mental health first aid course.
Yeah.
Right? And I think, we sustain injuries to our mental well-being far more often than we do physical, really, very often, whether it's a particularly unkind social media post, right? Or, we encounter people all of the time, right? And yet, I think empowering staff today also with that knowledge of, I think, mental wellness, the mental health first aid. I think that's probably one of the most positive things that I've seen occurring. I think it's a growing trend in Australia. Do you see that also happening in Singapore?
I see that also happening here.
Nice.
But the adoption rate might not be as high when it comes to actual training programs.
Right.
I still feel like many organizations are adopting the wait and see approach.
Right.
Like I'll just wait and see what other organizations are doing outside.
Right.
And it almost always have to start with leaders.
Right.
Yeah, leaders need to be able to recognize that they need to be on board with helping employees and supporting them with their mental well-being. They need to be able to role model vulnerability and authenticity as well, because how are people going to do this? Like some managers want to do it, but they don't have the necessary buy-in from upper management.
Right.
Yeah. So, but if upper management sees the need that, okay, this is something that we need to focus on, very quickly you'll see that decisions can be made. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michelle. Michelle, tell me, in your observations of the organizations where they may be best practice for this stuff, right? Mental well-being, flourishing through by being at your psychological best, what might you say are 2-3 things they do particularly well?
In organizations, they have an open culture an open culture where it's relatively flat, where employees feel that they are able to confide in their boss. The levels of trust and safety with their direct manager goes up. One of the things that I often see in organizations that have more positive cultures are also that they have very informal events or activities for bonding.
Right.
So it goes beyond the lunch or the official lunches or the official D&Ds or work dinners or town halls. But what are colleagues doing outside of work itself? It could be a nature walk. It could be, Fridays we have like $1 beers. I know it's happening at one of the offices here, and people tend to be able to be more connected in those spaces. So how are we creating those moments of connection as well beyond the official job description?
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Just treating people like normal human beings and getting them to connect.
And also addressing workload.
We
can't move away from addressing workload because you can put all the programs in place, but if we don't address the systemic factors that make someone mentally unwell, then we are not really moving the needle.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the reality is, in the Asian culture especially, asking for help is often perceived by people as a weakness, not as a strength.
Yeah.
And so making it really safe for people to say, hey, I'm drowning, I need help.
Yeah.
And preferably for leaders to recognize that and be able to check into their staff and even ask questions like, hey, what's on your plate? I'm just mindful that your well-being is a really important thing for me, is so critical. Michelle, this has been an absolutely enlightening conversation. I want to thank you for your generosity of spirit and that wonderful, authentic being that you've been throughout. I speak about authenticity, and I think people can see and feel that and experience that firsthand. Share with me, Michelle, one day when it's all said and done, how would Michelle most like to be remembered?
Oh, wow. I think about like my own funeral quite a fair bit as well. Wow. I think through this podcast, about all the thoughts that are happening in my head. And I want to be remembered as someone that, I don't have to be very rich, but I want to be remembered as someone that made an impact in someone's life. So it doesn't have to be, tens of thousands, but even that one person or that 10 people that have impacted, I think, it's a well-lived, meaningful life.
Thank you. It takes vulnerability to impact, and you have been an absolute model of that today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Your generosities and honor. I get so inspired learning about journeys like this. I feel like we share this crusade to elevate the importance of well-being, and especially the consciousness of happiness and joy, and knowing that it translates to the bottom line, right, of organizations. You can have flourishing cultures that will actually take your performance to another level. And I think it's become a necessity today, not just a nice to have.
Yeah.
But hey, Michelle, I know that I know that a lot of our audience would love to hang out and check out your work even more. We'll make sure that all the contact details are in the show notes, and so that they can find out more about you. But I just wish you the very best. I know this is just part of our journey together, and looking forward to exchanging notes and even collaborating more.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Dom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You rock. All right.